Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Strong. For my African American history class, I'll be making a podcast about the media bias during the 1992 LA riots. So you might ask, what were the 1992 LA riots? Well, it started when in 1991, Rodney King was pulled over and brutally beaten by four police officers. On April 29th, 1992, the four officers were acquitted of all charges brought against them. Uh, Riots happened right after that, the same day, April 29th, and buildings were burned, people were attacked and killed, stores were looted, and the police struggled to control the situation. Eventually, the National Guard was called in. The aftermath of the riots was that 58 people had died, 2,000 people were injured, 11,000 were arrested, and $1 billion in property damage had been done. So, how did the news cover the riots? The LA riots are pointed as pointless and uncivilized by many media outlets. They tried to make the rioters seem like criminals, and they did not consider the riots to have any function. In reality, the rioters were fighting for social reform, trying to bring about change to stop the discrimination against African Americans. Despite that, the media favored narratives that made white people and the law look better, and the black people were often painted as aggressors. So, why did the media cover the riots this way? The media coverage of the riots reflects the racism and inequality at the time. In 1992, black people were still facing systemic discrimination from white people. And so, the historical significance of the media bias during these riots is that it shows that racism is still systemic and ingrained in America. Often the the law or the media will perpetuate this kind of inequality. And so, to fight against this injustice, the people often have to take matters into their own hands. They have to stand up for what's right, even if the law or the media says it's wrong. The people need to lead their country towards equality when the government doesn't. So, if you don't do this, if you don't take action as people, then, you know, black people will continue facing discrimination. So, so let's talk about the context of the 1992 riots. So, prior to the riots, race relations were heading in a good direction in LA. Tom Bradley had just become LA's first black mayor, and from the late 1970s to 1992, over 2 million immigrants had moved to LA. LA was called a cultural mosaic at the time, and people of different race and ethnic backgrounds commonly intermingled during this time. Of course, there's still a lot of issues in LA. There are a lot of long-term issues that caused the riots. So, uh, there's a lot of tension in South LA. South LA had a large black population at the time, I think over 50%. And people in South LA had been facing a lot of, repeated discrimination from white people. And there had been a high unemployment rate in this area. There had been rampant drug use in South LA, and there's a lot of gangs and violence. So that kind of helped, you know, cause these riots. And another long-term cause, or really a short-term cause, but in 1991, Latasha Harlins was shot and killed uh, by a Korean store owner, Soon Ja-do. Latasha Harlins was a 15-year-old black girl who was suspected to be stealing orange juice, although in reality she had the money in her hand ready to pay for it. And so Soon Ja-do shot Harlins because she thought Harlins was stealing. And when Soon Ja-do was As soon as Sunjadi was being tried, um, the recommended sentence is actually 16 years. The jury had decided for 16 years in prison. But the judge reduced the sentence to probation, community service, and a $500 fine. And of course, this upset a lot of people. And the immediate causes of the LA riots, of course, that's Rodney King. Rodney King was beat by several police officers for about 15 minutes. A bystander had recorded the attack, and his footage was released to the country. King had suffered skull fractures, broken bones and teeth, and permanent brain damage. And when the officers were charged for using excessive force, all four of them were acquitted. And this led people to riot. And why did they riot as opposed to other forms of protest? Well, they wanted to express their discontent with something, and they felt that they could not be heard otherwise. African Americans are often they don't have their voices heard, so riots is a very extreme method to get your message across. So that's why they rioted. So, news coverage on the riots often painted the riots as pointless and uncivilized. The media showed a lot of people condemning the riots. This included government workers like police officers, politicians, and they also showed black people condemning the riots, kind of to help discredit the riots' intentions. It also showed like black businesses that were destroyed and tons of Korean businesses trying to get the message across that this was a very uncivilized behavior. Now, keep in mind that although the media painted these riots as uncivilized, keep in mind that the African Americans tried to be civilized before the verdict was passed. After King was beaten, people didn't riot right away. They restrained themselves until the verdict was passed, because they had trust in the justice system to sentence these police officers for their crimes. So they were civilized at first, but after the officers got acquitted of all charges, they realized that the justice system wouldn't carry out justice. It had failed them in a sense. So they knew that they had to take more extreme measures to carry out justice in a sense. And so the media's failure to consider this about African Americans reveals their bias. They don't see or they don't care about the systemic issues that black people have faced throughout America's history. They just consider things from a white perspective. They're blinded by their privilege and they see the law as just. Because to them, like the law has been just like for white people, but they don't understand that the law is not just for black people. So this kind of bias kind of helps perpetuate racism. You'll see that it's a common theme that the media favors the law. Even like during the trial, some outlets had said that King was potentially violent after being pulled over. So trying to justify like the police brutality. So yeah, they try to make the law look better. Sure. People were often painted as aggressors during the riots. They were often showed doing violent acts like looting, beating, and killing. And the LA Times had released 41 articles portraying blacks as aggressors. And the Tribune had released 20 such articles. The New York Times had released 29 of these articles. In reality, the majority of people arrested for looting and rioting were Latinos. So that further shows the bias of the media outlets and trying to skew the facts. Another interesting thing is that the media tried to build the narrative that the Black Korean conflict was a major reason for the riots. During this time, the Koreans were painted as like the model minority, and kind of people thought that the blacks and Koreans had a poor kind of had poor race relations, and so the media tried to play that up a lot. Said that the racism between the two had pitted them against each other and was a major reason for the riots. However, the media failed to acknowledge the real reasons for the riots, which is the social inequality and the injustice that the black people have faced. And so the media just, continues to hide the systemic issues of America. Another major theme was that the LA riots were painted as race riots most of the time. So this makes it sound like people were rioting for racist motivations instead of justice. It kind of further discredits like the reason behind the riots. And it kind of also caused people to assume that the stereotypes of like African Americans or Latinos were responsible for the riots. Like you know, African Americans were stereotyped to be like violent, no good people. So it kind of led the media kind of led those stereotypes to. So what should we take away from this? So even when race relations seemed fine, there are often racist biases against minorities. And in this case, the media skewed the facts and made African Americans look bad. This shows that racism is still heavily ingrained in America, like the law, the media, education, all that. They often discriminate, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and discriminate against African Americans. So we, as people, can't grow complacent in fighting against this racism. If the government, the law continue to discriminate against minorities, the people need to, remind them who runs the country, and that's the people, that's us. Because if the government and the law continues to discriminate against minorities, the people need to stand up for what's right. You know, if the government won't try to fight discrimination, then who else has to be us? So the people need to lead their country towards equality and fairness. You know, if if we take action like this, whether it's rioting or protest, we can progress America to a more united, peaceful future. So